Hello everybody. Uh, Today I want to do a low quality video on psychology. It can be a bit long. So first of all, I'm gonna get straight out, tell you this. I know barely anything about philosophy or psychology, so you should not really trust my word in any of this. And I'm more so just showing some conclusions I have on like my observations, the things I've thought of, etc. So I'm more representing my opinion than actually showing anything that is factual. So anyway, today I want to talk about the needs pyramid, and I'm going to talk about a version I came up with this. So you probably already know this, right? This is the Maslow needs pyramid. It's about psychology. There is a physiological needs at the bottom, the very bottom of the barrel, what we need to survive. It is breathing, food, water, shelter, and overly, this is the very minimum. It is what we need to survive. You don't have this, you don't live. So essentially, this is the bare minimum. Now, as you go up, new needs appear. So there are safety and security needs that you need to meet to properly live, right? There's health, employment, property, and family. Like these are the new needs, and now as you meet your physiological needs, which you most likely did, you're gonna need these. And as you meet these needs, health, employment, you're gonna move up, and you're gonna see love and belonging. You're gonna see self-esteem, self-actualization. It just goes up, and as you meet the new needs that come up, even newer needs come up. So in the end, I think this does do a pretty good job probably, but I want to talk about today a version that I personally came up with, and this is the version basically. So in here, instead of 5 layers, I made 3 interconnected layers of this. There is physical and biological needs, there is emotional and psychological needs, and there's spiritual needs. So at the very bottom, we have again the biological needs. And first of all, one thing that I want to talk about is I kind of tried more so to ground everything with evolution, because I accept evolution as a theory, and in science, a theory is a proven thing, such as gravity. So overly, I will be talking a lot about evolution as well. So I wanted to more so than to make like an isolated version of the needs pyramid, I want to more so create something that is explainable through evolution. Anyway, so what is evolution? Evolution is simply, in short term, it is a flow of things. It is not a conscious being, but it is rather the way things are. It's a law of nature, and it's again not a conscious being. It does not make active choices, and it's not a conscious being. Instead, it is an order of things. Now, it refers to how animals adapt to their environment and come up with strategies to survive. The weak die, the strong survive, and according to these new strategies and ways of living, evolution happens. So, one important thing is that evolution is not never, like basically never perfect, and it has side effects that it didn't account for, because it doesn't account for anything. It just does what works without thinking deeper for it. A big example of this would be arthropods. Arthropods have this thing called molting. Essentially, arthropods have a thicker outer shell and an inner soft body. And that thicker shell does not grow with their inner body, which means they need to shed that shell and grow a new one, and this leaves them in a vulnerable state. Okay, and during this state, they often die. this is a fault of evolution, a disadvantage that it didn't account for. Now, why did I talk about this? Because intelligence is a form of evolution. We see intelligence in a lot of successful creatures and how it got more advanced over time. For example, intelligence allows more power inefficient way of surviving. What I mean is intelligence is hard to upkeep in humans, for example, but it can pay out greatly. So think of it this way: intelligence lets you analyze the situation. It lets you think about your surroundings in a logical, rational way, come to a conclusion, and develop a strategy to survive. Without intelligence, you couldn't do this. For example, bugs don't have a very clear understanding of their surroundings, and they can come to very solid conclusions and, adapt in such a way. Intelligence is one of the best things at adapting. Or you see fish, which are a lot more stupid than mammals. But when you look at mammals, for example, a lot of mammals have higher sense of intelligence. That's why they are so adaptable. They use strategies, tactics to survive, and overall, this puts them above a lot of other creatures. Okay, now intelligence, you don't see intelligence this advanced in anywhere but humans. And here's the interesting part. As I explained with molting, intelligence is not something with no downsides. More specifically, what intelligence does is it adds a new meaning to life. And I'll explain this. As I explained too, intelligence lets you observe your surroundings, come to conclusions and strategies, and survive. It lets you adapt in environments you were meant to be in. And overall, it pays out greatly. At the same time, it can help with other stuff such as empathy. So I did put it outside this evolutionary advantage line. However, I would say that it is kind of more of an advantage than a disadvantage, because empathy in the end is what lets a species survive as a whole rather than an individual being. How this works is you seek to support others, and overly with empathy and love, you are essentially covering for your kin's, your species' weakness, ensuring they have a better chance at surviving. And again, evolution does also see this as a benefit, because evolution usually prefers to pick things to ensure a species as a whole surviving, or life as a whole surviving, rather than an individual being. So in the end, empathy came out as a great way of doing this, because it allows cooperation. For example, humans on their own actually have a pretty bad body. Humans are pretty weak in a lot of ways. However, we were able to drive mammoths to extinction. Why is that? A lone human can't do that even with tool use, but a group of humans can, because they cooperate to achieve acts that are normally not possible, which basically means empathy and overall intelligence working with social life in this layer basically lets you feel a physical need. It makes you more powerful, which lets you meet needs such as food and shelter and safety. Because, it lets you achieve things you previously couldn't, or sexual relief. This is a motivator to breeding that intelligence causes. It's a natural urge, and that's why we do this, to make more kids, essentially. But then things get a bit interesting, because after a certain point, the evolutionary advantage turns into more of a disadvantage. What do I mean by this? So, as you can see too, at around these spots, we have an evolutionary success. What this means is essentially at this stage, humans stop surviving and start living. And essentially what I mean here, right? You probably are not struggling to make it to the next day. It might seem like it, but even a homeless person most likely will survive. And the reason to this is simply because, you're in a society now, you're in a civilization, and people are basically guaranteed to make it to the next day unless something unusual occurs, such as an accident. And what I'm trying to get at, right, is that survival isn't a main goal anymore, and so the main thing of human intelligence, the side effect, starts showing, because it no longer seeks the ultimate goal that evolution seeks for. So the ultimate goal around here is basically ensuring the species survival. Essentially, the goal of life in a biological sense is simple: reach adulthood, fuck and make kids, so breed, ensure the species goes on, and then survive as long as you can, usually. So essentially, after breeding, you can die. It doesn't really matter. This is the biological need, and we can live with that. Like, we can accept that. Are we just here to, have sex and die? No. But animals are not in a successful enough of a situation to answer these needs, like ask these questions. So these biological needs are their ultimate goal. But as I said too, we as humans, we did actually reach this state, right? And this state is when our physical and biological needs are almost completely met, but we come up with new needs. And this is because of how human intelligence works. So human intelligence is designed in a way, in an evolutionary sense, to seek answers to problems. It is supposed to analyze the situation, come up with answers and strategies, and survive. It is on persisting. However, as you reach this state, as you can see too, you face less problems. You no longer need to account for any physical problems. This part, it becomes mostly irrelevant because they're answered already. But then there are less, questions to answer, and that's why the human intelligence starts becoming more sensitive. So essentially, a person that couldn't have such an easy time with physical things such as finding food might not have such a craving for love. But when you do meet that, when you do reach this level and stop actually worrying about making it through the next day, things like love and happiness start holding more importance to you, because your body or your mind automatically starts worrying about little things more. And even when those are met, you start asking bigger questions such as how. Normally, you shouldn't be asking how because it holds no evolutionary advantage, in a clear way at least. But you are asking that question, and your body, your mind, actively works on it, right? But then, even when you answer these, you go up and start asking why. And again, even like with how, you can still argue that it has an evolutionary advantage. For example, when we figure out how a tree grows and how a fertilizer makes a tree give better results, we learn something about the tree, how it works, so we use that as an evolutionary advantage. So even to a certain extent, even a how can work. But for the most part, a why doesn't work. It's why. Like, why am I the way I am? Why am I a human? Why am I not an animal? We are an animal, but that's aside the point. And these hold basically no evolutionary advantage, but we still ask them, and we still spend so much of our life trying to answer these questions because they start mattering to us more. Now, so I'm gonna get to an interesting topic, and this will be about money. So basically, I'm gonna make this, and this lime color will represent money. Hold on, money. So what is money? Money is essentially a human invention, but it is a symbol of material needs. Essentially, in our current society, in our current world, money equals physical needs. You can buy water, shelter, warmth, food, almost everything with money. So essentially, money answers your physical and biological needs. You see, here is the problem. Money does not answer emotional and psychological needs to full extent. Now, you might be saying it does. You can buy love with money. No, you cannot. It is a fake love. True love comes from emotions rather than money. Because this, again, love for money, if you're seeking love for money, it does eventually go down to physical needs. Because it is essentially a way of surviving, ensuring you survive, right? Because you have more money, you're guaranteed to survive, you have a better life, etc. Essentially, it's a material thing rather than an emotional thing. And so, this is where the saying, you can't buy happiness or love with money, comes from, and it is true. While you can't do anything with money without money, because if you can't meet your physical and biological needs, you can't meet any of the other needs, because this comes first. When you have money, it doesn't just mean you have everything. And another thing I'm going to get to is poverty. So you will see in a lot of poor people or in rich people that used to be poor, they value money over almost everything, because that's a simple thing. So I'm going to use this square to represent what a person has to worry about. Let's use this what's it called, light yellow, to represent what a person needs to seek answers for. And you will see that for the most part, a poor person, for example, needs to meet these needs, because again, they can't provide themselves with a sustainable amount of food, water, or shelter. They are actually struggling to survive on a physical level. And while they do still have emotional and psychological needs, and even some spiritual needs, they are almost mostly insignificant. And this is why their main struggle is money. And this is exactly why when they think money is everything. Because when, as you can see too, you see how big this square is, right? In fact, we should probably be using this circle instead as a form of showing what they care about. For example, this is what they care about in the end. And you can see that if I use money, which is lime as I said too, to fill all of this, you can see that vast majority of their problems are filled. This is why to this person, money seems like actually the answer. But then we get to an actually rich person. Let's use this color to represent a rich person, right? And a rich person actually has the physical and biological needs covered, because they can buy all of this with money. But again, human mind works in a way that if you pass this border, the mind keeps going up. So you now need to answer these questions. Now, the difference between an average person and someone that overly cares about money is this: they have such an amount of money, and it filled this part so flawlessly that they assume it can automatically feel empathy, it can automatically feel everything else, even spiritual needs. However, money has one thing: money can fill physical needs, and it can, to a certain extent, fill emotional needs. However, it cannot fill spiritual needs such as questioning. It might seem like it, but in the end, it kind of fucking doesn't. So this is why money isn't everything is such a true thing, right? And hold on, yeah. So that's enough about money. And I'm gonna say this, right? Hold on before I pass on. I am privileged when it comes to this, because I was never super poor, I was never super rich. I never actively worried about money or actively thought about money, and I never saw it anything about material. And this is why I think I can come to this conclusion that money isn't everything, and essentially only a means of survival in a physical level. So anyway, we're gonna move on. What were we on about? Now, As we move up the list, you're gonna see that we get to this interesting part, this interesting level. And this is the emotional success, right? Actually, before this, I forgot about this part. So another thing is, you see this part where you are feeling depressed, right? You don't feel truly happy or content despite seemingly all your needs being met. And this is the part about, new needs again. So think of you yourself. Let's symbolize it again with this. Let's say you don't struggle with biological needs or physical needs at all, and you're, let's say, in here. You are kind of about to ask why, but not quite, but you definitely ask how, and you seek love, you seek happiness, and for the most part, almost all of your struggles come from emotional and spiritual parts. Now compare that to, let's symbolize with this light gray. This is a medieval person, right? A medieval person has a pretty high amount of physical and biological needs compared to you. An example would be, hold on, you see, an example would be a simple comfort such as a tap. This, let's say, is a water tap, right? This is simple access to water or electricity. Now, these are comforts. Essentially, they're bordering the disadvantage part because you don't absolutely need these to survive, but they make your life easier. And you're so used to them that they essentially become a necessity. Whereas, for example, a medieval person, a villager, a peasant, they don't have a tap, they don't have electricity. If they want to get up and wash their face, they can't do this like you within 10 seconds of waking up, going to the bathroom and washing their face. No, they need to walk arguably miles to a river, or they need to draw a bucket from a well and use the ice cold water instead of a specific temperature of water, right? And here's the interesting part. This happens all throughout history. This is a peasant, let's say. But for example, we go up and let's say this is a person living in the industrial era. You see how their needs don't necessarily get less. This arrow goes up as you progress in a, what's called technological way. As you provide new things, as your old needs are met, new ones appear, because again, intelligence works that way. However, one thing I will tell is how this is actually not an instant process. For example, an old person, despite having the same comforts as you for a long period of time, they will still be a lot more content with their situation than you. An example would be, let's say you have a grandparent and they have lived in, let's say, the 70s in a poor household. They did not have clean water all the time, so they did not have access to this little part of our pyramid. This basically means that they grew up without it. However, now they have it. Why are they still telling that they had it worse than you, and how they're still not on the same level? Because it moves gradually. This was the grandparent, right? Let's say this was the grandparent. And as they, let's say, as their needs are met, they slowly go up. Whereas you were born here. Let's say you were born 20 years ago, so your entire life you have access to clean water. That's why that seems like such a necessity to you, and you don't even feel that need anymore. It doesn't need an active answer anymore. And so that's why you still seem like you're struggling despite not having anything to struggle for. But we get to another interesting thing. Now, when you take this tap away, you know what happens? You don't just go down to this level and be like your grandparent again. No, it changes and you start being like this. You see how your old mind still has there? You still crave love and happiness. You still ask how and at times why. But you also no longer have the clear access to the physical needs that you have. You don't have the correct answers to those. And this is where main thing comes from, right? What was I gonna say again? So, this is why when your comforts are removed, you're struggling a lot more than you should compared to a person the whole time. Again, as I said too, Industrial Revolution, it happened, and we should technically be a lot happier because people live longer. Like old before vaccines were invented, 15 babies were born, only 5 saw the age 5, and only 3 saw the age 30. And people died after they reached 50. And there wasn't healthcare, there was no proper schools, and a simple infection could mean you died, so on. But now you can see that they seemed happier with what they got. Does this mean that what we have now is worse? No, fuck no. Because if what we have now, we switch to that, we would be in this situation, and it would take a long time to go back slowly, gradually to this state again. That's just how it is, right? That's just how the human mind works. It essentially will never be satisfied, and we need to understand that and stop comparing old times to ours. Anyways, we're gonna move on to the next topic at hand, and this is the emotional success, as I'm going to call it. Now, the emotional success here is when even your emotional and psychological needs, which are a lot harder to meet, are met. Your sixth sense, as I'm gonna call heart, emotions, and feelings, are also met as much as your fifth senses, which are, let's say, your eye. Sorry for the poor driving, your nose, smell, hearing. These are your fifth senses, right? These also have like certain needs, your taste. And when you meet these, like they need you to meet them. And these are things like physical needs are, as their name suggests, they're physical, they're easier to understand, they're basic instincts. Hunger, you actively feel hunger and it's easy to explain. Whereas an emotional thing, sadness, is harder to explain. It needs more things to work on. It needs you to brainstorm on it more. And spiritual needs are so hard to answer because you shouldn't be feeling that way, but you are. And that's specifically because, as I said too, as per its nature, intelligence will never stop seeking answers. What I mean is that it can't stay idle. You could call this boredom if you want, but essentially, human mind can't comprehend being purely happy, and this is why if it needs to, it will come up with new problems just to answer them. And this is basically how it works, right? This is just how it is. That's how human intelligence is wired. And this is why I use the quote, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. In this case, imagine Sisyphus as the human intelligence, the brain, and the boulder here, the boulder that Sisyphus pushes, as the answers to questions. Or more so, you should think of this as Sisyphus slowly rolling this up the hill to answer more and more. In fact, we could think of this pyramid as an actual pyramid, and you can see that we can make this little circle, right? Think of this as the boulder, and yours is Sisyphus pushing this. As he pushed this, you can see that it doesn't end. It never ends. And this is specifically how why I use this, metaphorically. Because spiritual needs, as I call them, it might actually get a new name as you go up. That doesn't really matter. In the end, it will never be fulfilled because the human mind can't have that. Example, cheating in a game. Let's say Minecraft. So in Minecraft, you are in survival. If you go into in the first minute of the game, get yourself diamond gear from creative, it won't feel gratifying because you didn't actively struggle for it and you didn't actually get it in your hands. So it was basically cheating, you didn't struggle for it, and you never had to answer that. That's why it doesn't feel gratifying. I know this is not the perfect answer. There is other things about this, such as like the feeling of an actual reward. But like in the end, this does kind of is similar to what we're talking about right now, and it essentially is like that. Human mind won't be pleased if it doesn't have to work for something, and it can't stay idle. It needs to actively work, and again, as I said too, it creates new problems. It creates new questions, and those are the how and the why. And now, time to get to one of the more controversial things that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to symbolize this with gold here. This gold, my friends, is going to be religion. Religion. So, where did religion originate from exactly? So, here's the thing. I think, again, I want to remind you that I know basically nothing about these subjects. My history is not great, and I'm mostly making speculations around. But anyways, let's get to it. So, religion, in my opinion, came on the ancient humans when they were, reaching about these states. And at this point, their emotional and psychological needs, actually, they're more along the lines of like these parts. The emotional and psychological needs stop like being so important. In fact, let's call this the existential phase. Existential line. So what is the existential line? And let me tell you this. Existential line happens when you start going from asking how, so the simpler spiritual needs, to why. The harder ones to answer and the ones that can't really be observed fully. And as I said too, as they met their physical and biological needs completely and emotional and psychological needs to some extent, they needed to answer the questions of how and why, and they didn't have a way of answering them. You see, they can't answer the how properly and they can't answer the why. But in the end, they need to, and to answer these, they use religion. For example, how did this tree grow? Or why, when we put a rat in an empty place, it dies, but when it's with a tree, it doesn't die. Now, I know in the ancient times, they probably didn't experiment with stuff like this, but think of it similar to this. In old times, they could have just assumed it as trees have this essence of life that they give out, and they spread out this life that happens to other creatures, right? And this is how religion is kind of like. It brings an explanation to things that couldn't be explained before. And this especially applies to the question of why, which is a lot less observable and a lot less objective than the question of how. Not to mention that, as I said too, the question of how might be, kind of relates and be useful in an evolutionary sense, whereas why, for the most part, is completely irrelevant. And in the end, this is where religion comes into play. Religion starts filling the spiritual void you have. The doubts and questioning you have starts being filled by religion, at least to some extent, which gives you a sort of contentment. But at some point, a problem started happening because people that didn't quite reach this existential line, people that were still struggling with physical and biological, even if not that, they were struggling with emotional parts. They started seeing people around here and how they were using religion to be happy, and they started using religion to apply religion or ideologies such as religion on physical and biological needs as well as emotional and psychological needs. And here's the important part, my friends. Religion almost works exactly the opposite of money, as a religion can never fill physical needs. You might think that praying for food does bring food to your table, but there is no objective proof of that. You can believe it, but you can't fully prove that. But there is something, and this is the reason why I did put the spiritual needs within the emotional and psychological needs. And this is because the religion and overall ideologies can still substitute for emotional things, and they do it especially better than money, because you see, you can think that God loves you or that you matter, that there is an eternal life, and this gives you a sort of like a hope. This gives you a sort of happiness, and as I said too, love. And overall, this can, in the end, fill out this void, and eventually work in the goal of emotional and psychological needs. Or in the very top here, it works a lot better, right? because these are emotions that you can hardly describe. Maybe you can think of it that way, but I'm not exactly sure about this part. Anyways, so this created something interesting, and it's that people, as I said, just started trying to answer these questions with religion, and they couldn't. And even when they couldn't, they kept trying to and started having these false understandings of religion. And for people that didn't fully make sense of things in their mind when it comes to religion, this really made them cold towards religion, because it didn't make sense. It didn't actually answer their needs properly, because it was never meant to. And over the day started growing a disliking towards spiritual needs, and I think this led to atheism in the end. It, I think, could be that it wasn't meeting their, actual physical and biological needs properly, but people were still forcing it upon them, which made them cold towards it, which is actually what's exactly happening in Turkey. In Turkey, many people actually hate religion, even when not knowing it fully, because there's a lot of these, people that go around talking about religion, talking about their opinions, etc. And it really makes the youths cold towards religion, because it's forced down upon their throats. Not to mention, usually these are false understandings and commentations on religion rather than the true religion itself. And this is exactly why true religious people are the chillest to be around, because true religious people are using religion to fill this void, or at least above the existential line. They are aware, consciously or subconsciously, that it can't fill physical and biological needs, as well as not filling all of emotional needs, and that humans need human love instead of just a divine love. And that's why they will mostly not force it upon other people's throats or try to use religion in unfitting places, because they know its place. In the end, they did come to peace with that fact. And now, as we talk about this, now I want to talk about another topic, and this is going to be, my friends, science and how science affected religion, especially the older ones. You see, science, actually before this, I want to talk about the senses. What I'm going to call senses is this, right? Emotional and psychological needs rely on the sixth sense, while these guys rely on the fifth senses, which are objective. They are more logical, rational, observable, and again, physical. This is an emotional level. You can't fully prove emotions. People, we still don't understand fully emotions, why a smell of coffee may make you feel good. These are still not fully answered questions. And so this is a lot more of an abstract part of the pyramid compared to the physical and biological needs of the pyramid, right? So, you see, let's say you love somebody, and you can't really explain it. Let's just say you love somebody and you want to be with them. However, you also saw it with your own two eyes. They killed somebody. Now, both in an evolutionary and rational sense, you shouldn't be with them because they killed a person. And in the end, this will affect your mind in such a way that your love will start faltering, because it no longer meets your physical values. Essentially, if physical needs aren't met, you can't meet emotional needs either. And usually you won't need to. But even if you need to meet these needs, for example, that love, you want to be with them, seeing that person did kill somebody means that you really shouldn't be with them. And this usually takes priority, because again, it's an observable fact, it's a logical thought, and that's how you come to the conclusion that that love is harmful. So why did I talk about this thing about senses and thing about that? This comes down to science and how it relates with religion. So science is, especially as it developed, answered the question of how very well. For example, come back to the thing about the rat and the little tree. In a jar, rat dies on its own because there is no oxygen to breathe, therefore it suffocates and dies. And an alone tree dies because it needs carbon dioxide to survive, which doesn't happen in a jar, as it turns all of it into oxygen and it dies. But when they're together, rat produces carbon dioxide while using the oxygen given from the tree, whereas oxygen takes the carbon dioxide and provides oxygen for the rat to consume, therefore creating a loop. Now, on a long-term scale, the rat will probably still die, but you get what I mean. While older ancient people may have thought of this as Mother Nature and how trees give out life, and in a sense that's true, but now we know the science behind it. It's an observable fact. It makes sense, and in the end, it's an explanation that makes sense. So it fills the little. It doesn't necessarily fill a physical need, but it connects to your physical part. It connects to your logical thought, right? Logic. Whereas when, let's say, that was, if you were believing in tree actually giving out life, when you learn about this, that starts faltering because it no longer meets the thing your eye see. It no longer meets the, objective truth. So your thought falters. Even if you don't notice this, it will falter little by little, and that mostly depends on your faith. This especially happens with religion and older forms of religion, and when they contradict science. And don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on any specific religion, and often religion does actually go along with evolution. For example, evolution and other forms of science. For example, many people state that Islam goes against evolution, but it really doesn't. But I don't want to go in depth on that yet. But another thing is that science usually doesn't answer about the existential line, and usually questions such as why do need some form of metaphysical understanding rather than just scientific objective explanations. And this is why philosophy is a lot more of a subjective and a debatable topic rather than science. For example, when science focuses on the answer to how, philosophy focuses more on the question itself of why. Why is more important than the answer to why in philosophy. And this is why it's actually quite interesting. Let's say the roles should be here philosophy, and to some extent religion is actually what covers the why. And here's the thing, the reason a lot of people are atheists nowadays is because of this. When religion contradicts the objectiveness on a smaller level of things, they start to not believe in it even on the above the existential line. That's why more seemingly logical, and I won't deny that it is by a physical sense more logical, nihilism and such pessimistic philosophies are usually preferred nowadays above religion, especially in youth, because as I said too, it doesn't make sense. Religion doesn't. It might be because of science, or it might be because they got cold towards religion due to the fact that it was supposed to, in their mind, fill their needs, such as emotional and psychological, but it didn't. And in the end, they decide it's not going to fill their spiritual needs either without even trying. That might be happening to me right now, although I'm not exactly sure. Anyways, there is a lot more to talk about, and obviously this covers a very small portion of the human psyche, and we could spend hours upon hours talking about the details of this, such as mental disorders and how greed happens, how people have different versions of this pyramid. There is way too many things to consider when talking about topics like this, and this is more of a short dive into what I thought about and what I came up with, rather than something you should take fully seriously. Not to mention, I'm gonna bring it up once again, I know almost nothing about philosophy or psychology, and this is more so just me giving out opinion, and maybe as seeking people to talk about this or share my opinion and see if anyone agrees with it, as I just like talking about these kinds of things. Anyways, thank you a lot for listening to this, because it was 45 minutes, almost an hour, of a random fucking guy that barely knows anything yapping about a topic that he just thought was cool, and trying to explain things in a both logical and an illogical way. in his own understanding and observations. So anyway, once again, thank you, take care, have a great day, and remember, empathy is the key to everything. Hate, hate.